Margaret Rose Henderson had spent 42 years being the perfect wife. She'd raised 3 children in their colonial home in Connecticut. She'd hosted countless dinner parties, volunteered at the library, and never once complained when her husband Robert worked late. At 73, with soft gray hair and kind blue eyes, she still pressed his shirts exactly the way he liked them. Her daughter-in-law, Vanessa, was 34, blonde, ambitious, married to Margaret's eldest son, David. They'd been married for 8 years, and Margaret had tried her best to welcome Vanessa into the family. She really had. But Vanessa had always looked at Margaret with something cold in her eyes. Something that made Margaret feel small and old-fashioned. Something that said Margaret was in the way of the modern, expensive life Vanessa wanted. It started on a Tuesday morning in March. Margaret was sorting through the mail when she found a credit card statement. Her name, her account, $37,000 in charges. Her hands trembled as she read through the list. Flights to Cancun, a luxury resort, fine dining, spa treatments. She hadn't been to Cancun. She hadn't left Connecticut in months. Margaret picked up the phone with shaking fingers and called the credit card company. Yes, they confirmed. The charges were made 3 weeks ago. Yes, someone had requested a second card on the account. They had all the proper information. They'd sent it to an address in Hartford, Vanessa and David's address. Margaret sat in her kitchen for a long time, the statement spread on the table before her. The afternoon light slanted through the lace curtains she'd hung 30 years ago. She thought about calling David, about calling the police right then, but something stopped her. She thought about how Vanessa had smirked at last Thanksgiving, when Margaret had worn her mother's vintage brooch. How Vanessa had rolled her eyes when Margaret had offered to teach her to make pie crust from scratch. How Vanessa had posted on social media about finally getting away from family drama. While she was in Cancun, Margaret had seen that post. She just hadn't realized the vacation was on her credit card. She wouldn't call David yet. She wouldn't call the police. Not yet. Margaret Rose Henderson had been underestimated her entire life. People saw a polite older woman and assumed she was fragile, simple, easy to dismiss. They had no idea what she was capable of. She started with research. Margaret might have been 73. But she knew how to use a computer. Her grandson had taught her. She printed out every single fraudulent charge. She called the credit card company again and officially reported the fraud. She documented everything with timestamps and reference numbers. Then she called her lawyer, Richard Chen, who'd handled her estate planning. She explained the situation calmly, precisely. Richard was quiet for a moment, then said he'd help her gather what she needed. Next, she did something that surprised even herself. She called her old friend Patricia, who worked at the airport. Patricia owed her a favor from years back when Margaret had helped care for her mother. Patricia quietly pulled the flight records. Both Vanessa and David had flown to Cancun, using Margaret's stolen credit card for the tickets. Her own son, her David, with his father's kind smile. He'd known. He'd gone along with it. That hurt worse than anything. Margaret waited 3 more weeks. She was patient. She'd learned patience raising 3 children and managing a household for decades while Robert built his accounting firm. She kept having Sunday dinners. She kept smiling at Vanessa across the table. She kept asking about their vacation, watching Vanessa's eyes light up as she described the beaches and the cocktails. Watching David shift uncomfortably, not quite meeting his mother's gaze. It must have been expensive, Margaret said gently, passing the roast chicken. Oh, we've been saving, Vanessa said, waving her hand with its perfectly manicured nails. We deserved a real vacation, without having to worry about family obligations. She said it looking right at Margaret. David cleared his throat. Mom, we didn't mean. It's fine, darling, Margaret said, her voice soft as silk. I want you both to be happy. The police came on a Thursday. Margaret had timed it perfectly. She'd invited Vanessa and David for dinner, just a casual weeknight meal. They'd arrived at 6. The police arrived at 6:30. Just as Margaret was serving her famous apple cobbler. The officers were professional and courteous. Detective Maria Santos had kind eyes that reminded Margaret of her youngest daughter. They had a warrant. They had all of Margaret's documentation. They had the credit card company's fraud investigation results. Vanessa's face went sheet white, then flushed red. This is insane. Margaret, tell them this is a misunderstanding. Margaret looked at her daughter-in-law for a long moment. Then she looked at David, her firstborn, who suddenly looked like a scared little boy. I gave them nothing, Margaret said quietly. You took it, you stole from me, went on vacation with my money, and mocked me for being old and irrelevant. Did you think I wouldn't notice? Or did you think I was too old and stupid to do anything about it? The whole thing unraveled quickly after that. The investigation revealed that Vanessa had been planning it for months. She'd stolen Margaret's personal information from documents at a family gathering. She'd applied for the additional card online, having it sent to her address. She'd convinced David that his mother had so much money she'd never miss it, that Margaret was getting old and confused anyway, that they deserved it for putting up with his difficult family, credit card fraud, identity theft. The charges were serious. David broke down crying at the police station. Margaret learned later. He confessed everything, trying to shift the blame to Vanessa, saying it had been her idea, that he'd been weak and gone along with it, that he was sorry. Vanessa showed no remorse at all. Even when she was arrested, she spat that Margaret was a spiteful old woman who was ruining their lives over nothing. The legal proceedings took months. Margaret attended every hearing, sitting straight-backed in the courtroom in her good coat and pearls. Robert sat beside her, stunned and heartbroken about their son's betrayal. Their other two children, Jennifer and Thomas, rallied around Margaret. Jennifer held her hand in court. Thomas helped her with the paperwork and the victim impact statement. In the end, Vanessa was sentenced to 18 months in prison and 5 years probation. David received a lighter sentence, 6 months and probation, because of his cooperation. But the damage was done. The marriage didn't survive. David and Vanessa divorced while she was incarcerated. David lost his job when the arrest became public. He had to move back home with his parents, 39 years old and broken. Margaret visited her son once in jail. Just once. They sat across from each other in the visitation room, separated by plexiglass. David couldn't look at her. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face drawn. Mom, he whispered. I'm so sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. Vanessa, she made it sound like it wasn't a big deal. Like you had so much money and wouldn't even notice. I was weak. I was stupid. Margaret studied her son, the boy she'd rocked to sleep, the young man she'd helped through college, the grown adult who'd stolen from her. You're right, she said quietly. You were weak, and you hurt me more than you can imagine. Not because of the money, David. Because you thought so little of me. Because you let someone convince you I didn't matter. David's face crumpled. Tears ran down his cheeks. I'm so sorry. Margaret sat in silence for a moment. Then she spoke, her voice steady. You're my son. I'll always love you. But trust? Trust has to be earned back. And that's going to take a very long time. 2 years later, Margaret's life had found a new rhythm. David was out on probation, living in a small apartment, working as a clerk at a hardware store. He came to Sunday dinners now, quiet and humble. He was slowly, painfully, trying to rebuild his relationship with his mother. Margaret was letting him try, but things would never be the same. Vanessa had disappeared after her release. Last anyone heard, she'd moved to Florida. Margaret didn't think about her anymore. Margaret herself had changed too. She'd started taking classes at the senior center. She'd joined a book club. She'd even started dating a widower named Arthur who owned a bookshop and made her laugh. One afternoon, Margaret was having tea with Patricia when her friend asked if she regretted how everything had unfolded. Margaret thought about it, watching the steam rise from her cup. No, she said finally. They taught me something important. People will underestimate you if you let them. They'll see kindness as weakness, gray hair as irrelevance. But we're stronger than anyone gives us credit for. She smiled, a little sad, but also something else. Something with steel in it. I spent my whole life being what everyone else needed. The perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect lady. And somewhere along the way, I forgot that I matter too, that I deserved respect. Vanessa stole money from me, but she gave me something too. She reminded me that being kind doesn't mean being a doormat. Patricia raised her teacup in a toast to finally taking that trip without the old lady. Except now, the old lady has the last laugh. Margaret clinked her cup against Patricia's, her blue eyes twinkling. "Darling," she said with a smile that was all grace and ire, "I always do.